Dobro. History. Archive.
So picture this, Seoul, right after the Korean War. The city is literally in ruins, but something else is brewing. A scandal is about to explode that's not just about sex and lies, it's a courtroom drama that will put the entire soul of a nation on trial. And it all started with one single shocking sentence. Yeah, that is the sentence that lit the fuse. Can you believe it? A judge, in an official ruling, basically said that some women's morality, their chastity, just wasn't valuable enough for the law to bother defending.
And that really is the central mystery we're going to unravel today. How on earth did a legal system look at a serial predator and his victims and decide that the women were the ones at fault? The answer, as you'll see, reveals a country completely at war with itself.
To really get why this verdict even happened, we have to go back in time. We need to step into the world that produced it, a world filled with chaos, trauma, and some really radical change.
All right, so let's set the scene. We're in Seoul, the mid-1950s. The Korean War has just technically ended with an armistice, and the city is a wreck. But out of all that dust, this new, intoxicating wave of Western culture is just crashing ashore. We're talking jazz, mambo pants, and a whole lot of dangerous new ideas about freedom. So just to give you a quick timeline, the war ends in '53. By '54, this dance fever, they called it chumbaram, is sweeping through the city. Then boom, just 1 year later, our scandal explodes. It becomes this massive flashpoint for all the fears and anxieties of the time, which, by the way, were perfectly captured in this huge hit film from 1956 called Madame Freedom.
And right at the center of this whole cultural hurricane was a new kind of woman. She was called the Ap-your girl, which comes from the French for after the war. She was modern, she was independent, and to the old guard, she was absolutely terrifying. And you can really see the battle lines being drawn right here. On one side, you have the ideal of the traditional woman, whose place was in the home. And on the other, you've got the epicure girl. Her space was the dance hall. She wore these scandalous mambo pants, and she was looking for romantic love, not an arranged marriage. To a lot of people, she wasn't just modern, she was seen as dangerous.
These dance halls, they really became ground zero for this whole culture clash. Conservatives saw them as these dens of sin, places where all the traditional rules just went out the window and women forgot their duties. It was a perfect storm, and, as it turns out, the perfect hunting ground for a predator.
So into this world, this mix of anxiety and desire, steps our villain, Park In-soo. He was a guy who understood exactly how to use the tensions of the time to his advantage.
So just how successful was he? Well, this number, it says it all. In less than 2 years, he managed to deceive an estimated 70 women. And many of these weren't just anybody. They were educated university students from good families. The public was absolutely stunned. How could one man cause so much chaos?
Well, he had a method, and it was a chillingly effective 4-step playbook. Step 1, the disguise. He pretended to be a handsome naval captain, the ultimate symbol of status and security in post-war Korea. Step 2, the hunting ground. He'd go to these elite dance halls where he knew he'd find these modern women. Step 3, the promise. This was key. He'd promise marriage, which made everything seem legitimate. And finally, step 4, he'd vanish.
But here's the thing. Park's most powerful weapon wasn't his fake uniform. Oh no, it was what he said in the courtroom. With this single sentence, he did this brilliant, cynical judo flip. He wasn't the bad guy, they were. He was implying they were already damaged goods, and so they couldn't possibly be real victims.
And the craziest part? The court bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. The case stopped being about Park's crimes and instead became a trial of his victim's morality.
Okay, so this is super important. The whole thing hinged on the specific law he was charged under. It was called adultery by marriage fraud, and it had this one fatal flaw. The law was only written to protect women who were of chaste character. The entire trial was about to boil down to what exactly that phrase even meant. Which brings us right back to Judge Kwan's unbelievable ruling. He let Park walk on the main charge. He argued that any woman who was in a dance hall was just a pleasure seeker. By choosing to be there, he said, her chastity was no longer worth protecting. He basically drew a line in the sand. If a woman stepped out of the home, she was stepping outside of the law's protection. As you can imagine, this verdict tore the nation apart. A lot of men actually cheered for Park, calling him a hero for exposing what they saw as vain, loose women.
But women's groups were absolutely furious. They saw the verdict for exactly what it was, a green light for men to lie, manipulate, and exploit women with zero consequences.
The public outcry was so huge that a higher court eventually did overturn the acquittal. But the final sentence? For conning 70 women? A measly 1 year in prison. So Park got a slap on the wrist, the women were publicly shamed, and the judge's terrible logic continued to haunt the entire legal system.
And that gets us to the legacy. Park In-soo himself, he just kind of faded into history. But the legal precedent he inspired, that toxic idea of chastity worth protecting, well, it cast a long, dark shadow over Korean law for more than 50 years.
You can really see the full impact when you put the two eras side by side. Look at this. In 1955, the whole idea was protected chastity, where the government acted like a moral judge. Fast forward 54 years to 2009, when the law was finally struck down. The core idea had completely flipped to sexual self-determination, which sees women as autonomous and the state as neutral. What a change. And this is the principle that finally, officially, closed the book on the Park In-soo era of law. Sexual self-determination just means that every single person has the right to make their own choices about their own body and their relationships, and that their legal rights don't depend on their personal history. Period. So yeah, the law is gone. And that's a huge victory, no doubt. But it leaves us with one last kind of nagging question, doesn't it? The law might have changed, but has the culture? When we see victim blaming in the news today, questions about what someone was wearing or where they were or why they were there, aren't we just seeing the ghost of that 1955 verdict still haunting us?